The Gavoth Imperium had stood for 12,000 years. Its dominion spanned 17 galaxies, its will enforced by the Iron Fleet, its history written in the subjugation of 1,000 species. On the throne world of Gavoth Prime, beneath the light of a dying red star, the ancient Emperor Vorkon prepared to receive the latest supplicant race. The humans of Earth had been discovered 6 solar cycles ago. Their technology was primitive, their society fractured, their bodies soft and pink and easily broken. They were deemed unremarkable, suitable only for labor or consumption. But there were whispers among the census takers, rumors that these creatures had never been conquered, that they had a peculiar tendency to win unwinnable wars. Vorkon dismissed this as the sentimentality of underlings, and every species believed itself special until it knelt before the Gavoth. A formal declaration of subjugation had been sent to their world. The response, translated by imperial linguists, was confusing. It consisted largely of words like aggression and freedom and sovereignty, concepts that had been rendered meaningless in Gavoth space millennia ago. The final line was the most perplexing. "We will not go quietly. You will have to come and take us." Vorkon had laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the obsidian throne room. "They wish us to come? Very well. Send a single ship. Let them see the face of their new masters. Bring their leader here in chains." The ship that arrived over Earth was not a warship, merely a diplomatic transport. It was still a mountain of black metal, a kilometer long, bristling with weapons that were purely ceremonial. Its descent over the Atlantic seaboard was meant to inspire awe, not destruction. The Gavoth commander, a noble of the third house named Thrax, prepared his honor guard. They would march into the human capital, demonstrate their superiority, and return with the human leader in chains. It would be a simple, elegant display of power. He did not anticipate the flying machines. They came from the east, tiny things of metal and composite, screaming through the atmosphere. They did not request communication, did not announce their intent. They simply opened fire. The Gavoth ship's shields, designed to withstand interstellar debris and the occasional meteor, flickered and held against the primitive projectile weapons. Thrax was insulted. This was not war. This was an insect biting a boot. He ordered his ship to land, to crush the insignificant resistance. But the flying machines did not relent. They swarmed like angry insects, launching missiles that exploded against the shields. One of them, a larger, slower craft, flew directly into the ship's primary sensor array. The impact was negligible to the vessel, but the human pilot did not eject, did not try to escape. He simply flew his machine into the Gavoth ship and died. Thrax stared at the view screen, a strange, cold sensation creeping up his spine. What manner of creature treated its own life with such contempt? The ship landed in what the humans called Central Park, crushing centuries-old trees beneath its immense weight. Thrax marched out at the head of his 100 best warriors. They were 7 feet of armored muscle, carrying energy lances that could vaporize a tank. They expected to find a terrified populace. Instead, they found a crowd. Thousands of humans pressed against military barricades were screaming. But they were not screaming in fear. They were screaming in rage. They threw things, bottles, stones, shoes. A rock bounced harmlessly off Thrax's helmet. He ignored them. They were beneath his notice. His target was the human leader who stood behind a wall of soldiers holding primitive projectile weapons. Thrax activated his helmet's translator. "You are the leader of this world?" The human, a tall man with gray hair and weary eyes, nodded. "I am. You have attacked an Imperial vessel. You have killed members of the Gavoth crew. For this, your world will be sterilized. But first, you will kneel." The human leader did not kneel. He did not even flinch. He simply looked at Thrax with an expression the Gavoth commander could not read. It was not fear. It was not defiance. It was something else, something old and cold and patient. "I won't kneel to you," the human said, "and I won't let my people be slaves. You want this world? You're going to have to fight for it inch by inch, and I promise you it will be the longest, bloodiest fight you have ever known." Thrax raised his energy lance. "Then you will die first." The human leader did not move. The soldiers behind him raised their weapons. But before any action could be taken, a single figure stepped out from behind the military barricade. He was a young man, perhaps 20 standard cycles old, wearing the uniform of a human soldier. He was unarmed. He walked directly toward Thrax, see his boots crunching on the broken glass and stone. Thrax's warriors trained their lances on him. "Stop," Thrax commanded. The young man did not stop. He kept walking, his eyes fixed on Thrax. There was something in those eyes that made the Gavoth commander uneasy. It was the same look he had seen in the pilot who had flown his ship into the sensor array. It was a complete and utter disregard for his own survival. "I said stop!" Thrax roared, leveling his own lance. The young man was 10 feet away. 5 feet. He stopped. He was close enough that Thrax could see the pores on his skin, the tiny hairs on his face, the sweat on his brow. He was so small, so fragile. One blast from Thrax's lance would reduce him to ash. The young man spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the sudden silence. "My grandfather fought in a war. He said the enemy was brave, but they were afraid to die. He said that was why we won, because we were more afraid of losing than we were of dying." Thrax did not understand. "What is your point, insect?" The young man smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "My point is, you're not the first ones to try this, and you won't be the last. But you're all the same. You think because you're bigger, because your weapons are better, that you've already won. You haven't. You haven't even begun to fight." Thrax's finger tightened on the trigger. "Your words are meaningless. Your species will be erased." The young man took a final step forward, closing the distance. He was now so close that Thrax could have reached out and touched him. "Then do it," the human whispered. "Pull the trigger. But know this. Every one of us you kill will be replaced by 10 more, and we will never, ever stop." Thrax hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. In that moment of hesitation, the young man moved. It was not a soldier's movement, not a trained attack. It was something primal, something born of 1,000,000 years of evolution on a brutal, unforgiving world. He lunged forward, his right hand clenched into a fist, and he drove it with all the strength of his body, all the rage of his species, all the desperate hope of his world, directly into the center of Thrax's faceplate. The Gavoth were a proud species. They had conquered worlds, shattered civilizations, bent the stars to their will. But they had one weakness, one flaw that 12,000 years of dominance had never revealed. Their facial structure, and the very bone that supported their helmets and housed their primary sensory organs, was brittle. It had evolved that way to allow for the expansion of their complex brains during adolescence, but it had never been tested. No one had ever been foolish enough, brave enough, desperate enough to strike a Gavoth warrior in the face. The young man's fist connected with a sound like a thunderclap. Thrax's head snapped back, the faceplate shattered, the bone beneath shattered with it. The Gavoth commander, a noble of the Third House, a warrior who had personally overseen the subjugation of a dozen worlds, fell backwards and lay still. A profound, absolute silence fell over the park. The Gavoth warriors stood frozen, their energy lances trained on a single, unarmed human who had just killed their commander with his bare hand. The human soldiers behind the barricade were equally stunned. The crowd held its breath. The young man looked down at his hand. It was bleeding, the knuckles already swelling. He looked at the fallen alien, then at the other 100. He did not run. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He simply stood there, breathing heavily. The lead Gavoth warrior, a sub-commander named Kor, looked from his dead commander to the human. He had served in the Iron Fleet for 300 years. He had witnessed the final days of the Xylos Confederation, the annihilation of the Relian Matriarchy. He had seen courage, and he had seen terror. He had never seen anything like this. The humans behind the barricade began to chant. It was a low, rumbling sound at first. Then it grew. It was a single word repeated over and over. Earth! Earth! Yeah, Earth! The sound was not musical. It was threatening. It was the sound of a predator that had just realized it was not the prey. Kor looked at his warriors. He saw the uncertainty in their eyes. He saw the fear. For the first time in 12,000 years, Gavoth warriors were afraid. They were 100 light years from home, surrounded by millions of creatures who had just watched one of their own kill a Gavoth noble with a single blow. And they were chanting. Kor made a decision. It was not a decision born of strategy or military doctrine. It was a decision born of pure, primal survival instinct. He lowered his lance. We'll return to our ship, he said, his translator struggling to convey the tremor in his voice. We will communicate with the Imperium. There has been a miscalculation. He and his warriors backed away slowly, their weapons still trained on the crowd, but their eyes fixed on the young man who had not moved. They retreated into their vessel and the massive ship lifted off, its gravity drives tearing a hole in the sky as it fled the atmosphere. On the ground, the young man finally looked at his bleeding hand. A soldier ran to him, offering a field dressing. The young man shook his head. He was staring at the sky, at the fading trail of the Gavoth ship. The human leader walked over and stood beside him. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said, "What's your name, son?" The young man looked at him. His eyes were clear, his breathing steady. "Private Elias Vance, sir." The leader nodded slowly. "Private Vance. Do you have any idea what you just did?" Elias looked back at the sky. "I hit him, sir." "You hit him," the leader repeated. He looked at the crowd, still chanting, still surging against the barricades. He looked at the soldiers, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. He looked at the empty sky where the Gavoth ship had been. "You hit him," he whispered again. And then he laughed. It was a short, sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You actually hit him." News of the incident spread through the Imperium like a plague. It was impossible, unbelievable. Yet the sensor data and the testimony of the surviving warriors confirmed it. A single, unarmed human, a member of a newly discovered species with the combat equivalent of sharpened sticks, had killed a Gavoth commander with a single blow. The blow had shattered his legacy, his honor, and his very skull. The human had not used a weapon. He had not used a strategy. He had simply punched him in the face. The implications were staggering. The Gavoth had built their empire on the premise of invincibility. Their warriors were the pinnacle of evolution, their technology unmatched, their will absolute. But now a chink in the armor had been exposed. It was not a flaw in their ships or their weapons. It was a flaw in themselves. Their bodies, their proud, ancient bodies, could be broken by a soft, pink, fragile human. On Gavoth Prime, Emperor Vorkhan sat in his obsidian throne and stared at the holographic report. He watched the footage, grainy and distant, of the young human walking toward Thrax. He watched the blow land. He watched Thrax fall. He watched the human stand there, unharmed, unafraid. Vorkhan was old, and he had seen empires rise and fall. He had ordered the death of billions. He had never, in all his long life, felt fear. He felt it now. It was a cold, creeping thing that coiled in his gut. He looked at his own hands, his own armored flesh, and for the first time, he felt fragile. The humans had not just killed a commander. They had killed an idea. They had shattered the legend of Gavoth invincibility with a single, brutal, undeniable act. And now, every species they had ever conquered, every world they had ever enslaved, would be watching. They would be waiting. They would be wondering if the Gavoth could be beaten. Vorkon looked at his advisors, their faces pale and drawn. He looked at the images of Earth, a small blue marble orbiting an insignificant yellow star. He thought of the young human, of the look in his eyes. It was the look of a creature that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. The Gavoth Imperium had existed for 12,000 years. It had faced rebellions, plagues, and cosmic disasters. It had never faced a species like this. It had never faced a species that did not know how to surrender. Vorkon spoke, his voice a dry rasp in the silent throne room. "Prepare the fleet. All of it." An advisor stammered, "My Emperor, the full fleet? That would leave our core worlds vulnerable." Vorkon looked at him, and the advisor fell silent. The look in the Emperor's eyes was not the look of a conqueror. It was the look of a man who had just realized he was not invincible. "We are not going to conquer them," Vorkon said quietly. "We are going to make sure they never, ever come for us." On Earth, Private Elias Vance sat in a debriefing room, his hand wrapped in bandages. He was being asked the same questions over and over. "Why did you do it? What were you thinking? Were you afraid?" He answered each question the same way. He wasn't thinking. He just did it. He saw the alien pointing a weapon at his leader, and he moved. It was as simple as that. The debriefing officer, a colonel with decades of experience, looked at him with a strange expression. "Private Vance, do you understand what you've started?" Elias looked at his bandaged hand. He thought of the alien's face, the way it had shattered. He thought of the chanting crowd, the fleeing ship. He thought of his grandfather, who had fought in a war and come home with medals and nightmares. "I think so, sir," he said quietly. "I think we just showed them we're not afraid." The colonel nodded slowly. "That's one way to put it." He leaned forward. "The intelligence analysts are going crazy. They're saying that Punch might have done more damage to the Gavoth Imperium than any weapon we could have built. They're saying we just broke their entire psychological warfare doctrine with a single fist." Elias looked confused. "I just hit him, sir. I didn't mean to start a war." The colonel smiled, a grim, weary smile. "Son, you didn't start a war. You ended the one they thought they'd already won. Now they know. Now they all know. We're not prey. We never were." Outside, the sun was setting over a changed world. The streets were filled with people, celebrating, crying, singing. They didn't know what the future held. And they didn't know if the aliens would return tomorrow or next year or never. But for the first time in their history, they knew something with absolute certainty. They were not alone in the universe. And whatever else was out there, whatever horrors or wonders waited among the stars, they could be beaten. Because one of their own, a boy named Elias Vance, had proved it. He had looked a god in the face and punched it until it fell. And in that single violent moment, the human race had announced itself to the galaxy not as a species to be conquered, but as a force to be feared. The legacy of the Gavoth, built over 12 millennia, had been shattered by a human fist, and the universe would never be the same.